So, greetings, hello. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern again for my weekly fasting vigil and testimony to what's going on spiritually in the world at the moment. I'm giving these talks free to the world. Anyone that is interested in a perspective as a philosopher of peace on the current situation. And since I started, I began them in disgust at the way the Tory party was imposing Brexit on a disunited kingdom. Yesterday was the anniversary of the 1603 coronation of King James. I've lived in Britain all over. I run the British and Irish Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I was appalled at the way the Tory party had been hijacked by a sort of thought world that basically ethics has gone out the window in the name of a fake democracy. So this is a lie based on a lie. And where dishonesty and mendacity take over politics, we really are in trouble. I've never lived through anything like this before. I never thought to see it in my lifetime. The irony is that a couple of years before, in the run-up to that referendum, I'd been campaigning in Scotland for a truth veracity oath to be sworn by all parliamentarians. And I'm still campaigning for that. There's a website I've set up, and I'm still in touch with MPs and lords, all of whom should swear an oath of veracity, which means they can't lie in Parliament or they lose their office. And you can look at the website, And that should also be upheld in the USA, which desperately needs some kind of ethical code for congressmen and women. I was shocked at the mistreatment of that really nice American Hispanic congresswoman who was called an effing bee by another congressman, a man called Yoho. And she gave a very impassioned speech this last week about, the depravity and the lack of ethics of congressmen. Oh dear, if that's all going on. And then I've been following with interest John Bolton's revelations about Trump. Again, that's the problem, is if the president, and Bolton says he's using kind of, what did he call it, barroom, language. And if that becomes the norm, then what I was brought up to believe in civilization and civilized values and ethical norms are just being betrayed, by the people at the top who are supposed to be running the show. Now, this is the point at which John Locke and the Enlightenment traditions said actually the people have a duty to remove these people from power by any and all means available. And we've reached that point as far as I'm concerned. And when people are completely against ethics, common sense, veracity, truth, we have a duty of resistance, and I'm part of the intellectual resistance, not just to Brexit, but to all that's followed since, all the lies piled on lies, piled on lies. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and obviously since then we've got COVID, which is yet another lie piled on lies, piled on lies. And I don't go along with the kind of, there are conspiracy theories and then there are conspiracy facts, and there are historical methods to understand conspiracy facts as opposed to conspiracy theories. And I'm very much calling for conspiracy facts to be unraveled over COVID. This is why I've called on the scientific community and the UN to initiate an investigation into bioweapons research around the planet under the Bioweapons Convention. And there are people, intelligent philosophers, intellectuals in all parts of the world that are now calling for this. And that is a priority. So, there's a time lag between good ideas and then them getting out, being acted on and in the media and so on. It's like trying to catch falling meteorites from the heavenly world and then, scatter the light. It's a certain difficulty. I'm in the business as an intellectual of listening to the upper stratosphere and catching the meteorites and then helping to bring them down to earth. So I'm hoping that this this question will be investigated. And that's something else I've been up to this last week. Another, very important development in the last week is the final, long-delayed publication of the Russia report in the British Parliament by the Defence and Intelligence Select Committee, which has a new chair and which then finally published the thing. I mean, this should have been published before the last election. I honestly believe if it had been, that Trump and Cummings and the Tories would have lost. I think it is so scandalous, the information in the report, which is all available online. It's a PDF, I'm reading it. And the point basically that it reveals is that Russian oligarchs have hijacked the political process in London, in Britain. Now, I feel upset about this, obviously, because it's my city, it's where my parents got married, it's where I lived for, many years, it's where two of my children were born. I'm a Londoner. I come from the University of London. That's where my degree and my PhD come from. And I studied Russian history in great detail. And something has gone terribly wrong in British-Russian relations and internally in Russia and internally in Britain. I think the chap that runs the Byline Times, Peter Jukes, has nailed it on the head. He's gone public with his reaction to this Russia report, and I'm just, adding my reflections. His view is the following, that with the downfall of communism, so-called, in Russia, in 1989, 1990, and Gorbachev's unraveling of the Soviet system, something catastrophic happened, which we're only finally beginning to realize what happened, which is that Russian state assets of oil and gas and all the rest of it that were owned by the Russian people under the social democratic system that Gorbachev wanted. If only Gorbachev had survived in power, if he'd have been able to produce a sort of social democratic Russia, keeping public ownership of these key assets, implementing the disarmament program that he initiated, keeping the dialogue and good relations with the West that he initiated amazingly with Reagan and Thatcher, I think we would be in a very different world now. And unfortunately, of course, the reactionary kind of Bolshevik rearguard tried to oust him in a coup. I remember, living through all this. And then Russian populism sort of revived. Under Yeltsin, it replaced Gorbachev, and sort of Russian, really, nationalism revived. And Yeltsin didn't last very long, and Putin took over eventually, and has steered the country into this very swift and vigorous privatization process, in which what had been public assets were sold off to oligarchs, cheap, who made vast fortunes. Now, it's the complete antithesis to what social democracy stands for, which is that everyone has a, fair whack of a chance at life. You get it all sort of a basic level playing field of good education and basic needs, housing, clothing, are all guaranteed in some way with a safety net of social support. Well, in Russia, what happened was the wealthy oligarchs sort of took off into cyberspace in terms of their wealth and started doing very unethical things. And a lot of them fled abroad and ended up living in London. And we're talking people with trillions in their bank accounts, now very conveniently parked offshore through the incredible City of London financial wheeler dealers who park the money off in British dependencies like the Cayman Islands and wherever. The British have excelled at this piracy because that's what it is. It's international financial piracy. It means that money can't be taxed by any state, British, Russian, whatever. It's just there accruing profits for the owners. And now these people, over the last, 20 years, have gradually, according to the Russia report, and you should read it, it's online, have bought their way into influence and prestige in the British establishment. Because, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the financial business class, welcomed these crooks. A lot of them were actually crooks, into their domain, and they've sent their kids to Oxbridge. They've bought membership in whatever clubs, and wangled their way into various Freemasonic groups, and have done a huge takeover culturally of London and the institutions that Britain thought were impregnable. Now, and they finally bought control of the Tory party in the person of Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson and their cronies. Now, Dominic Cummings lived in Russia working with these oligarchs and is their tool. We don't know the whole details until he goes to jail and has to answer. It'll never be revealed, but obviously he's on a deep cover mission for the oligarchs of Russia, both in Britain and back home. And so Brexit was their absolute, jewel in the crown in terms of policy, because that policy, which they supported with as much as possible rigging the Brexit referendum through using Cambridge Analytica type methodologies up front and directly. What it did was it's enabled the Russian oligarchical and their intelligence cronies to drive a wedge between the UK and European Union. And for them, that means they've won. That's a victory. We saw the comment by the Russian ambassador just the other day. It slipped out. We've forced Britain to its knees. It'll never recover. Gloating. Now, this is Cold War mentality as normal. This is what I did for my doctorate. Only I looked at the need for peace in the Cold War. You see, so I look at this with horror, because this is a return to Cold War. It's spy versus spy. And nobody knows who to trust, except that. And what's happened is an amazing intelligence coup that's wingled its way into the Tory party and taken over the British state from within, and is now applying Brexit like a kind of totalitarian creed to silence all opposition intellectually. And the silencing of Assange and Craig Murray in Scotland is part of this silencing that's going on. So we're in a dangerous situation, and I think I'm not going to say any more about the Russia report. I'm going to continue reading it. I haven't finished the whole text. It's quite substantial. A lot of it is redacted. A lot of it is an annex that isn't published fully. So there's a lot to come out still. In any sane country, if a report like this came out, even after, even where we are now, in any sane country, there would be an immediate break on Brexit. There would be an immediate all-party inquiry into Brexit. There would be an immediate, apology letter written to the European Union, and it would be said that it looks, sorry lads, it looks like we were penetrated by Russian intelligence. We would therefore like to withdraw our Brexit letter, and we are going to have a second referendum on this matter. Only this time we're going to absolutely police the borders. We're going to shut Facebook down during the referendum, and Twitter and all the other things, and we're going to do this properly, or something. I think it's actually the only way to get a fair election, to be honest. And so anyway, that letter should be written. If there was any sanity and reason left in the British establishment and the state, and the Queen could throw her oar in and say, look, at the Privy Council when it next meets, say, look, I've read this Russia report. This is rather grim. We really got to stop this Brexit because it's just going to break up the UK. And we just had the anniversary of King James's coronation, the first time Britain and Scotland joined as one country. I can't, on my watch, allow this to happen just to satisfy Russian oligarchs. Sorry. Now, a decent Queen would make that speech to the Privy Council, and I urge her to do so. I might ring her up otherwise. Okay. Next point I want to mention is, the question of future intelligence, this has come up, I've mentioned this a few times in my talks. Obviously, as a peace studies scholar, I've always been interested in future studies. They're interconnected. How we envision the future, how we see it coming up, that's connected with how we see peace. As a visionary, I'm always trying to envision peace and then find for humanity a path to it. And a rational, logical, this is the way we can go, sort of H.G. Wells type mixture of future fiction plus how we get there. And this last week, I just want to say that I published a novel, my most important novel, which is, I've been sitting on it for, and I'm not kidding, for 20 years. It's a series of writings, a diary, and it is about this envisioning of the future of peace and how we can get there. So I'm not going to say more about it, but just go to my website and you'll see the link. And I think there's nothing quite like it ever been written, even with all the Olaf Stapleton and other future visionary novels. This is, in a different sort of ballgame because it's an intellectual history of the future, and that's not been attempted before. But the question of future intelligence is problematic. Now, the term was coined by my friend Judge Shlomo Soham in Israel, who was the future responsibility officer to the Israeli Knesset. They exist also. There's one in the Welsh Parliament, there's one in Sweden, and so on. We need to be visioning how the impact of certain legislations and policies in the present will have on future generations. It's because I'm trained to think in terms of the next 7 generations as a scholar and a philosopher and a futurologist and an expert in future studies that I can't let the Brexit lot get away with it. They're thinking, like with the mindset of a gnat or a fly. They're not thinking in holistic long-term terms, and I would say deliberately so. I think there's a myopia, and this is to do with the states of pathology that advanced capitalism produces. As capitalism feeds off its own reckless urge towards greater and greater profits, it creates conditions where it has to deliberately block out the social impact of its policies, the military impact of its policies, and the political impact of its policies. What we have in Brexit is naked, cutthroat, oligarchical capitalism, Russian, British, wedded to certain aspects of American, certain aspects of Israeli, the people that are running the world's elite sort of offshore banking interests, thinking that Brexit is good for profit. Well, for that crowd, the elite crowd, for short term, it will produce huge dividends, and already people have betted on the crash that is going to come with hard Brexit, and they stand to make millions from it. I mean, I find this as shocking as anything I've ever encountered. Well, this is what capitalism in its advanced state of decay, when it's lost all ethical constraints, does. And we're watching it, I'm watching it unfold with horror. And this is where future intelligence comes in. Because if you train yourself to see the future impact of policies, and you look at this long term, you can see this as a disaster. And there's no good news here at all, apart from the few predatory criminals, literally criminals, who think that this is good news. Well, what we need to be doing is designing legislation. We need an opposition of authentic, old-style conservatives who had a social conscience, the kind that used to run the Conservative Party, old-style Labour, who also had a social conscience, whose very existence as a party was premised on that, and old-style Liberals and Liberal Democrats, who were descended partly from the Social Democratic Party and the old Liberal Party, and again, who had their whole raison d'etre was premised on social conscience and restraining naked capitalism. That was the point of Gladstone and the Benthamite tradition of liberalism and the whole Locke tradition, and the idea that people have human rights were not just fodder for somebody else's profit. And so that was where the liberal and socialist critique of advanced capitalism developed in the 1830s. And my colleague round the corner, Pierre Leroux, who was mayor of my local town, Boussac, was a pioneer of that. George Sand up the road was his close friend. She was a pioneer of that, like romantic socialism. And that was, again, an ethical critique of the destructive impact of advanced capitalism, which is horrific, what we're seeing. So somehow we have to get wise. We have to really get our future intelligence sharpened. We have to take whatever, measures can be taken by acting in the present to guarantee the life, safety, safeguards, and so on of future generations. My strategy, my belief is that the best way of doing that is to advance peace on this planet, and that as we take steps to demilitarize the planet, so we will enhance and augment the lifestyle, the living standards, the social and economic security of every human being on the planet. That was William Beveridge's vision after World War II. He was a great liberal Democrat who was a peer. He was the head of the NSE, which is where I did part of my degree, and he was the Chancellor of the University of London, who built Beveridge. Beveridge Hall, where I studied political philosophy, is named after him. Now, he wanted a society after World War II where human rights, social and economic and political rights would be guaranteed by law, and people would have the right to dignity. This is the point of my friend Dr. Evelyn Lindner's International Commission for Human Dignity and Against Humiliation, because she's done a PhD at the University of Oslo exploring the cross correlations between dignity on the one hand and humiliation on the other. That poor congresswoman in America who spoke for the dignity of women not to be accosted verbally in their workplace by men that think they have the right to go around calling people rude names, and making menacing and threatening gestures and so on. I mean, unbelievable that should be happening in Congress. Just mind-boggling. Now, that sort of behaviour, that should lead, in my opinion, to immediate dismissal. There have to be ethical standards among these politicians. And the sooner we ethicists and philosophers insist on that and get together, the better. And we need to work with politicians who are aware of this. And that's really, the Liberal Democratic, the Green, the Socialist and the left, progressive forces around the whole world, through things like the International Socialist Alliance and the Liberal International and so on. We need to think up strategies. And as I say, my offering as a philosopher is the truth test. They have to tell the truth, these politicians, or they should be forced from office by law. Anyway, these are some of the ideas I've been juggling with this week, and I've put together a new website for the World Intellectual Forum, which I'm running here in Europe. You're welcome to get involved. I'd welcome any intelligent, committed, reform-minded citizens of every European country, and that includes Russia all the way to Portugal and the Caucasus. We have colleagues in Armenia and Ireland scattered around Europe, and Russia and so on, and Ukraine. What we're trying to do is bring together, the thinking power of European nations to act as a counter to the thuggery that goes on in politics and business, where people's lives are regarded as worthless tools in the advancement of my profit or my power. That was the Hitlerite phase, that was the Stalinist phase. And they succeeded because they managed to create an enemy that then they said, well, I'm the leader of the people who are standing up against them, And that creating an enemy is the way to create power. That's what the Crusaders did. It's what the Catholic Church did against the Cathars. It's what anti-Semites did with Hitler against the Jews. It's what the Bolsheviks did against, everyone who wasn't a Bolshevik in the end. I mean, total madness. Reading Simon Sebald Montefiore's biography of Stalin is I think, a must for every European that wants to know how fortunate we are that Stalinism failed. But it casts a very long shadow. And the Putin-esque oligarchs who are, trying to push Brexit really are in the Stalinist mode. of total duplicity and immorality and cutthroat thuggery. And they need standing up to, and the only weapon we have, well, the most powerful weapon we have is education, learning, reflection, pure intellect, science, actually knowledge, because this is all based on smoke and mirrors and lies. It's all propaganda stuff. And European Union has made a better stuff. We came together as a European body of nations in peace and amity, and we will survive this. The other thing that's happened this week is a great, development package has been agreed by European Union leaders about COVID. I'm so sad that UK wasn't at the table even. Ireland was. UK won't benefit. It's just mind-bogglingly sad that they're so short-sighted, these Tories that have taken us out of those conversations, and that need to think through with our European friends and colleagues policy on that macro level. There's so much we could have been doing for good. I've proposed the European Union create a mediation service. I still think that is a priority, because we need to stop conflicts within and on the outskirts of the European Union, including the whole Mediterranean region. War is not good for business, and I think the problem with the antediluvian thugs that have hijacked Conservative government in London is they are thinking war is good for business. They're stuck in that mindset, and the figures came out recently that 100 billion was spent by Britain on arms exports and so on in the last 10 years. It's one of the biggest businesses that UK does. Well, that I think is scandalous. And we need to find other ways to retool our factories so we're not turning out weapons, which in turn need the wars so that they can be justified. So you've got one branch of the British state selling the weapons, defence, blah blah. You've got another branch secretly helping stimulate wars, as in the revealed evidence from WikiLeaks of the destabilisation of Syria, which was deliberately engaged in by the US to bring down Assad, and Britain dabbled in that and helped with that game. That's great for business, because if we destabilise Syria, then my God, we can sell weapons to the factions. That's just beyond cynical. It's a kind of level of ethical immorality and ignorance that is in danger of taking us back to a very, very dark place indeed. And that's what the World Intellectual Forum opposes, both in the UK and throughout Europe, because some other European states, France, dabble in this kind of thing. They're not squeaky clean. France invaded North Africa and did some pretty dire things, and wanted its empire all around the world like the Brits did. Well, the European Union was to revision and remodel all that so that we can think of peace instead of militarism as the answer. And let's keep that project alive, and let's get rethinking in the UK. Now we know the full extent of Russian interference. We do need a second referendum. It's beyond a shadow of a doubt. If I was in the House of Lords as a Lord, and I was nominated at one point, and I have run 30 meetings there, I would be using the leverage of the power of the Lords to create a Lords investigation into the Brexit referendum and the results. And the Lords has power to have a parliamentary inquiry and to call witnesses and so on. That should be done as a matter of absolute priority. And the thing is, these ragamuffin so-called Tories, they're all fakes, haven't got a majority in the House of Lords, thank God. And they never will, because they're not substantial enough people to actually be worthy of that accolade. Okay, so what else have I been up to? Well, I've been obviously interested in the most recent thing I've been doing here is running the Mary Magdalene Studies Association conference, the annual conference on the 22nd of July, which we just had in this last week. And it was, I think, a very good success. I'm really grateful to all the speakers that came online. My friend Nisa Syed came in person from London. Wasn't a speaker, but she was very interested in taking part. And she's been reading some wonderful poems by a Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish, who was, I think, a very great poet. And there's a bit of a synchronicity story about that, because when I was in Palestine, Israel, launching the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, I went to the home of a blind Palestinian social worker and interviewed him in Jaffa. And he was a lovely man. The interview's available, you can watch it on our DVD of that. And some of that excerpts are online as well. And when we got to his house, he was in mourning because it was the funeral of Mahmoud Darwish that very day. And he died. Now, so he had the telly on with the funeral and all that, and then he gave us the interview very kindly, which was filmed. But I'd never read his poetry in great detail before Nisa turned up with the book. And it's this long poem called The Mural, which has got some amazingly haunting lines in it. I'm sure if one could read the Arabic, it would be even richer. But you can see why this man was esteemed as the greatest of Palestinian 20th century poets. So, yeah, the Mary Magdalene event was, I think, as I say, a success. I loved chairing it, meeting all the different people, giving talks. We had a variety of speakers from around the world, from America, from Turkey, from France, all over the place. And some very interesting things emerged about Mary Magdalene, about her life, about research going on into her, and from a different variety of perspectives. And it's been recorded, it's being uploaded slowly to our website at Ipskip One, where this talk is, and you'll be able to watch it, as the next little time unfolds. So thank you again to everyone that took part. And I gave a sort of final wrap-up talk at the end, summarising what I've been doing, researching into Mary Magdalene the last year. I spoke about a variety of things. Which you can listen to. And then it was finished by Amanda Kazar-Radcliffe, who's a friend of mine, a Gnostic bishop and a great sort of religious intellectual. She spoke and did a ritual and ceremony and a Gnostic mass to finish with. And although I think she's also an Anglican, it was a beautiful, moving close to the event. And thank you again to everyone that took part. Just to say that, from the perspective of Mary Magdalene studies, so the world we're living through is like a nightmare, like in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where she talks to Jesus and says, what do I do with all these visions I'm having, all these phantoms attacking me, all this smoke and threats and bullies from archons and dark, dark forces. What do I do? Poor old Mary Magdalene was in chaos and confusion, and it's as if we're living the nightmare that is in the Mary Magdalene earlier part of the Gospel. And I've been thinking about, I'm not sure if it's a work of art, a bit of theatre, a poem, like an update of the Mary Magdalene Gospel set in the 21st century. We're living through COVID. Where does that come from, Jesus? We've just been assaulted by this vast pandemic and millions of people are dying. What is this? Is this the angel of death visiting the planet? Please help me. I'm having weird, anxiety attacks. That would be an update of the Mary Magdalene Gospel. So I still think that there are many things we can learn, and it's a little glimpse of the kind of conversations that must have been going on between Mary Magdalene and Jesus. We don't know exactly, is it something that's in the mind of